Okay, today we're going to be learning Rosh Hashanah Daf Tet Zayin, the daf that you've been waiting for since we started Masechet Rosh Hashanah. Okay, we'll get back to that in a minute. Today's daf is sponsored by Stacy Goodstein Ashtemker in memory of her beloved mother, Arlene Goodstein, whose 6th year at site is today. My mother was a very special woman who loved to learn and who was especially committed to Judaism and built a strong Jewish home. She would be amazed that I began this daf Yomi journey and that I've been studying the daf every day for close to 2 years. She's especially missed today, as tomorrow her oldest granddaughter, Hannah, will marry Ido in the holy city of Jerusalem. We're sure she's with us at this moment and will be dancing with us tomorrow night. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to start now. Why did I say this is the daf you've been waiting for? You would have expected that this is the daf that would start off our Masechet, and it's very, very common that this happens, where the first part really doesn't appear at the beginning, all different possible reasons, but we don't really know what they are, maybe just to get us in a different way and then get to the main part at the end, or not the end, we're right in the middle, mamash smack in the middle of the Masechet right now. But this is, and we're only on the second Mishnah, if you remember, this is all about the importance and the significance of Rosh Hashanah, right? We know Rosh Hashanah to be Yom Hadin, the day of judgment. Where do we know this from? Well, we don't know it from the Torah, because in the Torah, it never says anything like this is the day of judgment. It's totally a rabbinic understanding that somehow developed somewhat later, not in the time of the Torah. And we're now going to learn about, we're going to start our next Mishnah. If you remember, just before we start, the first Mishnah started that there's 4 Rosh Hashanah, right? Arba'a Rosh Hashanah. Now, we had a little bit of a problem with that number. Where did we get 4? It's not really 4. It could be 5. It could be 3. There were all different options. And possibly they wanted to say 4 because of this next Mishnah, and possibly because they wanted to connect these concepts to the 4 seasons of the year, even though they're not divided by the 4 seasons. Okay, Safrai in his book Mishnat Eretz Yisrael, which I often quote, he talks about the fact that that there were really 6 seasons in the time of the Torah, and that the 6 seasons were, it was split up even in half months, and it was more. There also, there's an allusion a little bit to Tu B'Shvat because it's at the turn of one of the seasons, right? Like toward the end of the winter season. But anyway, he says, but clearly by the time we got to rabbinic times, there were only 4 seasons. Okay, and he proves it from a pasuk in Bereishit Perek where it says, Zera, V'kor, V'chom, V'kayetz, V'choref. It says 6 words, and it seems to be defining 6 different seasons. But by rabbinic times, there's already 4 seasons. Now, we're not going to talk about this in terms of seasons. It doesn't match the 4 seasons, but it does match. We're going to have 3 regalim, 3 holidays, and Rosh Hashanah. And it's going to be this idea of the concept of 4 and having to do with cycles of the year, likely. So here goes. The world is judged 4 times a year. Pesach, it comes to grains. We're judged about what the wheat crop is going to be like this year. Ba'atzeret al perot ha'ilan, on Shavuot, the fruits. Berosh Hashanah kol ba'ei olam uvrim lefanecha kivnei maron. On Rosh Hashanah, all people pass by God like b'nei maron. We're going to see what that is. There's all different interpretations. Typical one is sheep, right, which we have in Unatana Tokef, but not clear that b'nei maron are sheep. We're going to get to that later, not today's stuff. Rashi already tells us mefarish b'gemara. And Shinema, also this verse and how it connects, is going to also be explained in the Gemara later, so we're not going to deal with it today. Okay, he creates their hearts together, and he understands all of their actions. So from there, they learn that everyone gets judged on Rosh Hashanah. Doesn't really, right? It's also just that people get judged by God. And ubechag nidoni and malamayim. And on Sukkot, we're judged about water. What will be the water for the year? So now our issue is, we have a number of issues. First major question is, if people are judged once a year, aren't we judged on how much rain, how much crop, how much fruits, right? Isn't it all connected basically? Isn't that one issue? I'm going to be judged on my sustenance for the year, which is dependent on all those things. So really it's kind of all one and the same. So the commentaries say, some of them say, that the world is judged about how much rain will come to the world, how many fruits will grow, how much crops will grow. But how much each individual person gets of that what my share will be, that happens on Rosh Hashanah. That's one possible reading. So Fry claims that he even suggests that maybe there's something going on here between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And that if you think about it, and first of all, we're going to see the connection later in another Braita, but why Pesach on the Tfuah? Because we bring the Korban Omer on Pesach, and that was from the new crop. Atzeret al Pirot Eilam, because we bring the Bikurim. We'll see in the Braita it says a little differently, but let's just assume the Bikurim, right? The new fruits. Rosh Hashanah, we have this concept that connects to Yom Adin. And on Sukkot, we have the Nisuch HaMayim, the water libations. Now, both the water libations and the Korban Omer were sources of debate between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because if you remember, the Sadducees didn't believe in Nisuch HaMayim. It was only the Pharisees who believed in that. And the second thing is the date, Mimachorat HaShabbat. Remember, that was a big issue. What does it mean, Mimachorat HaShabbat? We say it's the day after the first day of Pesach, but they said it was after Shabbat. So since these were sources of debate, maybe this is the Prushim's way of giving significance to these specific holidays and the ceremonies that went along with them that they believed in that the Sadducees did not believe in. So that's a possible reading also. But I think what I liked about what he said was more convincing about this element that they wanted to give, like, let's just assume Rosh Hashanah is really the day of Yom Adin. But the rabbis wanted to give a religious, unique significance to each of the holidays and therefore associated it, right? If we talk about this concept of 4 seasons and 4s, associate it with holidays. So that each holiday, people had almost something in mind to pray for, to give it more significance. So it's not, whether it's real or not is not what's important. What's really important is what is the person, what his or her experience is when davening, when thinking of the holiday, about the significance of the holiday. So that's a possible way of understanding this Mishnah in a bit of a different way. Okay, next. Hey, Tfuah. So now the Gemara first asks, what Tfuah? And this, I think if you take Safrai's response, the Gemara is really getting at and looking at not from a zoom out position like Safrai, for example, was doing, or some of the commentaries were doing in terms of saying, what does this mean? But the Gemara is saying, wait a minute. If you're really going to connect Pesach with the crop of the wheat, we have a big problem because Ilema, which Tfuah? We have, hey Tfuah, which Tfuah? Ilema ha Tfuah dekaima. When we stand at Pesach, what happens? We plant around Sukkot, after Sukkot, before the rainy season. Then what happens? Starts to grow. The new crop has grown, but it continues to grow after Pesach. So when we stand on Pesach, what are we being judged on? The crop that's already standing up in the fields, that still has a little bit, to go? Or are we talking about right? So if we're assuming, since it's Pesach and you have Tfuah in your fields growing, and, it's partially grown, but not fully grown. So if you say that, it's talking about the crop that's there right now. But all the harpatkai in Hebrew is all the adventures. There's all the adventures that went upon this Tfuah before Pesach, meaning anything that happened to it until then, when was the judgment for that? If you're saying, right, it's a weird date. You would think you're going to be judged, like, let's say, Sukkot, you're going to be judged on rain. That's all the rain that's going to come because you're beginning the rainy season. But you're not beginning the season of Tfuah right now, of the grains. They're already grown. So if you're saying it's going to cover you from here on in until you're finished with this new crop, well, when do you ever get judged on the part that you planted? Okay? Like the fact that they were going well until now or not going well until now, when was the judgment passed on that? So therefore, they say it must be Ela Tfuah de Mizrah. It must be that on Pesach, and then it becomes a little bit strange. On Pesach, you're being judged for the new crop that you're going to plant after Sukkot. It's a bit of a weird timing to be judged on that now, but that's what they say it must be. Otherwise, you'd never have judgment on that crop. So it must be that. To which the Gemara says, okay, well then according to what you're saying, sounds like you're saying that each year's crop gets judged once. When does it get judged? On Pesach, before you've planted it. And then that judgment on Pesach is going to cover you from the time you plant it next Sukkot until after the following Pesach, when it fully grows. Right? That's what it sounds like the Gemara is saying. But they say that can't possibly be true because it says in a Braita, "V'hatanya tu'ah she'ira ba'kri o ones kodem haPesach nidonet l'shavar la'achar haPesach nidonet lahaba." If you have crop, a grain, your grains are growing, and something happens to them before Pesach, that something, whatever it was, a terrible storm, your crops never grew, whatever might happen, carrier onus is like, right, something unexpected happens to it. That's clearly from last year's judgment. But if it's after Pesach, that's from the next year's judgment. So that means if we take this crop that went basically from Sukkot till, I don't know how long the season went, but let's say it goes all the way even till Sukkot, you can still harvest it. That crop was judged twice. The beginning part was judged from the previous year, and the second part of its growth from when it was already in the fields to when it stays there until it's done, until it's reaped, that is judged a second time on Pesach. So basically each crop gets judged twice, the early part from the previous year and the latter part from the upcoming year. So you end up, when we say the Pesach nidonim ala tfuah, it's on the crop that's now and the crop that you will plant going forward. So this is really addressing what the Farber was trying to address is what's the connection between this holiday? Because really there's a problem. It doesn't make sense that it would work this way, but that's the only way the Gemara can make sense of it, because otherwise you're kind of praying in the middle of the crop's growth. So it must be you get judged twice on each crop. So then they say, and likewise in this Braita it says, like a person, right? You obviously get judged multiple times because you live for many years and you get judged every year on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. So they say, Adam shirabo krio ones, a person who something terrible happens to them, if it's kodem Yom Kippurim, if it's before Yom Kippur, it must be nidon l'shavar. It's from last year's judgment. La'achal Yom Kippur nidon lahaba. Okay, so right, if it's after Yom Kippur, it must be from this year's judgment. So Amar Rava Shma mina trei dine mitana. So he says from here you can infer each crop, this is what I said before, gets judged twice. The earlier part gets judged from the previous year, and the later part of growth gets judged later. So Amar Abaye, right? You might say, what's the difference, right? Practically, what comes out of this? So Abaye comes up with something practical. He says the following interesting line. Hilkach, therefore, ki chaze inish de mitzlach zara afla. When you planted that early crop, and now it's growing, right? There's crops that you plant and it takes a long time to grow. And there's crops that you plant that grow very quickly. So if you plant your wheat, which takes a long time to grow, and you plant it in the beginning of the season, and you see before Pesach, let's say 2 months before Pesach, and you see it's going really well, then you know that you've gotten blessed here this year, that the judgment on your wheat was a good one. So what should you do? Likadem v'lizra chorfa. Go plant something now like barley, which grows very quickly, because it'll grow before Pesach and you'll still be within this year's bracha. So it's like saying when you're on a roll, like go with it. Right? So you have God obviously is blessing you this year. So go plant something quickly. So de'ah demate l'maydina l'medaine. So this way, until you get judged next year, and who knows what's going to be next year, kadim salik, it'll already be growing. Now it's true, it doesn't protect you from this Pesach because maybe something terrible will happen to it, but at least you know the first part of it, which is, there's always two elements to when you grow things. There's number one, are they going to actually grow? Will the seeds grow something? And then once they do, will there be a terrible, remember one year, it was last year or 2 years ago, there was a terrible heat wave and everything started just turning brown. Like it ruined a lot of crops. So it's this, right? So yes, the first part is good. It'll get you somewhere. It might not completely get you somewhere, but at least you'll have a better chance of it surviving if it does well in the beginning. So now bracha, you have bracha on your side, go for it. Okay, so that's his interesting bit of advice. Okay, next we're going to go, that was very kind of nitpicky into how exactly does this work, right? With the grains being on Pesach, the timing doesn't really make sense. So they're forced to basically say each crop has two separate judgments on it, one earlier, one later. Now the Gemara says, Mani matnitin, but we have a bigger problem. Who does our Mishnah go according to? Now you're going to be surprised. Lo Rabbi Meir, v'lo Rabbi Yehuda, v'lo Rabbi Yossi, v'lo Rabbi Natan. We have 4 different opinions, and it doesn't match any one of them. These 4 opinions are found in the Tosefta in Rosh Hashanah, and we're going to read them right now. Titanias, it says in the Tosefta, Hakol nidonim beRosh Hashanah, ugzar din shalahem nichtam b'Yom Kippurim, divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir doesn't think there's 4 times that we get judged. Rabbi Meir thinks there's one time. The day of judgment is Rosh Hashanah for everything. The sealing of the judgment, the final judgment, in other words, right, God opens judgment on Rosh Hashanah. Everything is signed and sealed by Yom Kippur. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, second opinion, Hakol nidonim beRosh Hashanah. So he thinks the same thing. Everything is judged on Rosh Hashanah. However, it's going to have a big difference, though. The judgment is opened on Rosh Hashanah, but it's not sealed until each thing at a different time. So what is it? Now we know already. Pesach ala Tfuah. So on Pesach, God decides definitively. Okay, he opens judgment on Rosh Hashanah, but it's not decided till Pesach. Ba'atzeret al perot ha'ilan, Shavuot for the fruits. B'chag nidonim al hamayim, on Sukkot for the water. Va'adam nidon beRosh Hashanah u'gzar din shelo nechtam b'Yom Kippurim. But humans are judged on Rosh Hashanah and sealed on Yom Kippur. So he agrees with Rabbi Meir about the last point, but not about all the others. Notice here that the order, it's out of order. Did you notice that? Man comes, or man, women, people come at the end of this whole thing. Okay, not chronologically. Our Mishnah was chronological. Pesach, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot. This goes more topically because those three fit together better than Adam, right? That's a whole separate thing. And if you look in our Mishnah, even the language is different. B'Pesach ala Tfuah, Atzeret al Perot Eilan, B'Chag al Hamayim. But when it comes to Adam, it says, B'Rosh Hashanah, Kol Ba'ei Olam Uvrim Lefanecha Kivnei Maron. It even gets a pasuk. See, they're trying to isolate it a little bit and show that this is obviously, it's one of the four, but it's clearly stands out because obviously it makes sense, right? That's most important more than anything else. Not only that, but it's also Rosh Hashanah, which is our Masechet, and that's what we're dealing with. So I think for those two reasons. But here it's even out of order, which is interesting. Okay, that was opinion number 2. Opinion number 3, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Adam nidon b'chol yom. He gets rid of this entire concept. Okay, it's not, now, Rabbi Meir got rid of the 4. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda kept it, but a little bit differently, right? The judgment happens on one day, but I'm sorry, the judging and the Gzar Din, the final answer is separate. Rabbi Meir said it's all on one day. Rabbi Yossi says it's every single day. Every single day you're judged. There's no such thing as a particular time of year that's meant for judgment. Every single day. How does he know this? Shenemal, this is a pasuk from Eov. Vatifkedeni libkarim. Okay, I will be poked, right? Hashem pakadet tzara, right? You will be remembered by God every day. God is going to basically have a reckoning with you every single day. In the B'karim every morning. Rabbi Natan Omer, he's going to be like Rabbi Yossi with a minor, maybe major variation. Adam nidon b'chol sha'ah, every hour, as it says, and really when you see the pasuk, it means even every minute. Lirigaim tivchanenu. Okay, it says you will be lirigaim, every moment you will be tested, okay, or checked. Okay, this is in the same verse. Same verse in Eov. Okay, I see you're asking about Hoshana Rabbah. Hoshana Rabbah is a much later addition in terms of its significance. It's most of Hoshana Rabbah's significance comes from Kabbalah and much later. Okay, the Ari and all that. Okay, so here we have 4 different opinions. So now the question is, our Mishnah doesn't fit with any of them. Maybe it's Rabbi Yehuda. He was the most similar because he was the one who gave dates for the final decision of God. So maybe our Mishnah is talking about the Gzar Din. What's the problem with that? But then Adam makes no sense. Humans are judged according to the Mishnah on Rosh Hashanah. If it all is Gzar Din, when it's definitively decided, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's on Yom Kippur, not on Rosh Hashanah. So it doesn't really match. So Amar Rava, I have a better answer, he says. Our Tan of our Mishnah didn't hold like anyone in the Tosefta. There was a different opinion, a 5th opinion that appeared from the house of Rabbi Yishmael in a Braita. So here goes. 4 times of year, sounding very similar. B'Pesach ala Tfuah, b'Atzeret al Perot ha'ilan, b'Chag nidonim al hamayim. Again, the order is different. V'Adam nidon b'Rosh Hashanah Ugzar din shelo nechtam b'Yom Kippurim. So there's only one difference. So here, when they talk about Adam, they say the Gzar din is Yom Kippur. So how do you resolve that with our Mishnah? You say, Chikatani matnitin atchilatin. Our Mishnah was talking about the beginning day of judgment, not a final judgment. And therefore, Rosh Hashanah for Adam, and then it all fits in. So that's how we understand our Mishnah. Since we brought up this Breita, we're now going to discuss a little bit about Rabbi Yossi's opinion that said every day man is judged, or women are judged. My time at Rabbi Chisda, my time at Rabbi Yossi. So they say, what do you mean, my time? He had a proof there from the text. Why are you asking? So they say, Anan hachi kamplina. This is what we meant to say. My time, alo amar ke Rabbi Natan. So he says, why didn't he hold like Rabbi Natan? First of all, he took it from the same verse. And Rabbi Natan said, L'regaim tivchanenu, every moment, not once a day. So they say, Bechina yune ba'almehi, kidanami yune ba'almehi. In other words, both of those are God's way of checking into man. It's no different, really. Livkod, livchon, all really one and the same. So why wouldn't you hold like Rabbi Natan? Ela amar Rav Chisda, Tamei de Rabbi Yossi mehacha. He says, it doesn't really make sense if that's his proof text. We're going to bring a different proof text for Rabbi Yossi, because really, if he's going by that pasuk, it wouldn't make sense to say once a day and disagree with Rabbi Natan. Really, he would say one and the same. So it must be from a different verse that we've seen. Again, I'm going to repeat that we keep going back to these psukim from Shlomo HaMelech when he did the sanctification of the Beit HaMikdash. Seems to be a theme here of the Masechet. So he gets it from that verse, La'asot mishpat avdo, mishpat amo Yisrael, dvar yom biyomo. When he sanctifies the Beit HaMikdash, he says, this is a place to do mishpat avdo. You'll judge, me, your Eved, and your nation, dvar yom biyomo, daily. Daily means once a day. That's where he gets it from. Since we're already bringing this verse, we're going to bring another drasha that we've already seen from this verse. If you have the king and you have the nation and they're standing there to get judged, who's going to get judged first? The king. Because look at the order of the verse. First your Eved, which was Shlomo, the king, then the nation. Why? Two reasons. My time. It's not appropriate to leave the king standing outside while everybody is getting judged. Number two, right before God gets angry. By the end of the day, God is angry. He loses patience. Again, this is obviously putting human attributes to God. But in any case, right? Or we said possibly when he sees all the sins of the people, he's going to blame the king for them, and then the king will get punished for it. Amar Rav Yosef. Now we have we have a very interesting lines on the stuff. This is a very interesting one that I'm not sure if you've ever thought of, but probably you have this concept in your head, and this is based on our tefillot, that Rosh Hashanah, right? Rosh Hashanah yikatevun, b'Yom Kippur yechatemun, this idea of we're written on your Rosh Hashanah, it's sealed on Yom Kippur, this idea that everything's decided from the beginning of the year. So if that's the case, comes from Yosef, and he says, so why do we pray today for sick people, for weak people, right? Or for anything really? If it's all predetermined from the beginning of the year, there's almost no point for daily prayers, right? If you view prayer as not for ourselves, right? Which Shimshon Rav Hirsch talks about, hitpalel, right? It's reflexive, it's for our own sake. But if you say that it's for God, right, to change something, so then basically we don't really have a need for prayer, or, right, as Gita, you're saying, right, tshuva, anything really during the year. There's no point. So, right, unless you hold like Rabbi Natan or Rabbi Yossi, who says it's every day or every moment. So then it makes a lot more sense. So he says, right, Kiman ki Rabbi Yossi. The fact that we pray every day must be like Rabbi Yossi. It's very interesting to say it's not according to everybody. However, the Gemara brings a second option, which, right, thankfully, as you could explain it according to the other opinions, like this. The cry of humans is always valuable, even after Gzar Din. That means that the Gzar Din of God is never sealed completely. So yes, there's kind of an approach to what your year is going to be like, but it's going to be decided Rosh Hashanah and sealed on Yom Kippur, but you have the ability to change that throughout the year. So that's why we pray on a daily basis. Okay, so there's this concept of, right, again, it's hard to understand this, exactly how this works, but what they're trying to explain in simple terms is it's decided, but it can always be changed, right? Like when a parent punishes a child, right, and then the child starts behaving nicer or, getting out of jail early on parole. There's all sorts of ways where we could see this, where it's decided, but you have the power to change it. So there's two ways to read daily prayer. Whether we say it's really just according to those who think that every day or every hour, or maybe it really is according to everybody and you have the power to change it. Okay, remember that Rabbi Yitzchak comes up here. We're going to have a slew of statements in today's daf from Rabbi Yitzchak, some connected to our topic, and then some we're going to get a little bit off topic. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Akiva. Torah. Here I mentioned that we were going to see a braita that connects with the sacrifice on each of those days to the thing that you're judged on. Okay, so here we're going to see it inside. Why did the Torah say, Haviyu Omer b'Pesach, bring the Korban Omer on Pesach? Mipnei she'Pesach zman tefuai, because Pesach is the time of the grains, so we bring the grain, right, offering from the grains, because Pesach is the time that we get judged on the grains. And therefore, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Haviyu lefanai Omer b'Pesach, kadesh titbarech lachem tefuah shebesadot. God said, bring me this sacrifice so that I will bless you with that item. Likewise, Mipnei ma amra Torah, why were we told to bring the shtei alechem, which is this bread offering? It's a little bit strange because we're going to connect between the bread and the fruits of the trees. Because it's the time of the fruit trees. So Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, God said, two ways to understand this. Rashi says, right, what's the connection between the wheat that goes into the shtei alechem and not the bikurim? Exactly. That's what Gita, you're asking. That's exactly the question. Why not mention the bikurim? So one option is to say that it really means the bikurim, but you can't, which are the first fruits, but you can't bring the first fruits until after you bring the shtei alechem. So what it meant is, and I think they wanted to connect it more to offerings. The bikurim are not exactly a korban. It's not defined as a sacrifice, but the shtei alechem is part of the sacrifice. So say, bring this, and then that permits you to bring the bikurim, and then you bring the bikurim, and that's for the perot eilam. That's the simple way of reading it. Rashi has a much more creative way of reading it. He says this, okay, that's the beginning of Rashi. Then he says, V'ani shamati, the last four lines on the page here in Rashi, to Rabbi Yehuda l'ta'amei, ta'az l'kemad amar b'sanedrin, et she'achal Adam HaRishon chita ita. The fruit tree that Adam HaRishon ate from was chita, according to him. And there you see chita is trees, considered a tree, and there he connects between the chita of the shtei alechem and the tree and the perot eilam. It's an interesting creative interpretation. Anyway, he says basically, since Rabbi Yehuda said that there, that's a whole other discussion, which is, right, we always think, right, as an apple, nobody actually says an apple in the Torah. In the Gemara, there's all different opinions what it was, but none of them are apple. Okay, next. Why do we do the water libations? Right, after learning Masechet Sukkah, we know all about that. If you learned with us Masechet Sukkah, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Nischu lefanai mayim b'chag kadesh yitbaruchu b'hem geshmei bracha. Pour water in the libations on the holiday so that you will get rain. V'amru lefanai, and then say before me, Rosh Hashanah. Now, Rosh Hashanah is tricky. There's no special sacrifice on Rosh Hashanah that connects to anything. So how do we get to this? They say before me, Rosh Hashanah, Malchuyot, Zichronot, V'Shofarot. These are the three middle blessings of Shemona Esrei in the Musaf prayer. Malchuyot, Kadesh Timlichuni Alechem. Malchuyot is to say, you're making me into your king. Zichronot, Kadesh Yaleh Zichronam Lefanai L'Tova. Zichronot is to remind me, of all the good things you did so that I will judge you. And what's shofarot? Ubamed is shofar. The shofar is how you do these things. It's a bit of a debate what exactly that means. Most people say it's that you blow the shofar when you do these blessings. That's what we do in the middle of Musaf. We blow the shofar connected with each of the three blessings. Some people do it in the silent Amidah. Some people do it only in the repetition, right? Some people do it in both, but it's a big debate whether you do it during the silent Amidah or not. But anyway, we'll get to those in a minute, but this is how you do it with the shofar. So that's the shofarot, that's the connection. It's the prayer, not the sacrifice of Rosh Hashanah that is indicative of the judgment. We're going to have a bunch of things that connect with last week's parsha, this week's parsha, a whole bunch of things connected. So we just read about the Akedat Yitzchak, and in the end, instead of bringing Isaac, the binding of Isaac, Abraham brings a ram. So why do we use the shofar of a ram? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, tik'u lefanai b'shofar shel ayil, kedei she'ezkor lachem Akedat Yitzchak ben Avraham. So I'll remember, it's reminding us of the Akedah. If you remember, in our davening on Yom Kippur, on Rosh Hashanah, we mention all the time the Akedah. Okay, it's mentioned a lot. Even bichlal in slichot, and there's even in the longer slichot, there's the Akedah one. There's always one that connects with the Akedah. Not all shuls say it every day, but there is one. Will be as if you offered your own selves before me. Why do we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah? To which the Gemara says, Lama tukin? The Torah says to. Now, Torah doesn't really say it's to. What they really mean is that verse we keep going back to, which is from Tehillim. It's very clear there. You're supposed to blow the shofar. So it must be, Rabbi Yitzchak was asking, Alalama miri'im. Why do we do the trua sound and not just the tkiya sound? So they say, miri'im, what he's asking about that? It says in the Torah, remembrance of the trua. Trua is mentioned in the Torah. It must be his question was, why do we do what we call tkiyot miyushav? What are these? We don't, I don't know if you remember, do we sit for shofar blowing? No, we don't sit for shofar blowing. It sounds like there's ones you sit for and there's ones you stand for. So there's a bunch of different interpretations, which is which, but usually it's understood, well, tkiyot miyumad are clear. Those are the ones in the Amidah, the ones you do during Shemona Esrei and during the repetition of Shemona Esrei. The tkiyot and miyushav are the ones either before or the set that you do at the end. Most people think it's the set in the beginning. Let's just go with that. So why do you do that? So they say, kedei la'arbeva satan, in order to confuse the satan. Okay, why is it confusing the satan? Many different interpretations are brought, possibly because you blow then, they're not really the main ones. The main ones are with malchiyot, zechronot, and shofarot. We just saw that. So these aren't the main ones. And maybe the satan will kind of leave us because they'll say, oh, they already did the shofar. I have no, and then he won't realize that the real ones we haven't even done. Possibly Rashi says it's that when we do so many extra ones, he has nothing to say against us because we're doing so many mitzvot, and he basically has, nistatmim dvarav, right? His mouth closes up. He has nothing to say because we've done so many good things. Maybe that's why. A bunch of different interpretations. This could be connected to that line, which is if you don't do the tkiyot in the beginning to confuse the satan, then you'll have a bad year. You'll have a bad year. My taima delo irbav satan, because you didn't mess up the satan, and therefore you're going to have a bad year because the satan's going to basically be able to go to God and make trouble for you. But Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, another statement. Kol shana sherasha b'tchilata, rasha not with an ayin, like an evil person, rasha with a hey. That means it comes from the root rash. Rash is a poor person. If you act like a poor person in the beginning, now what does a poor person do on Rosh Hashanah, right? Cries his or her heart out to pray for a good year because they're suffering. And so if you make yourself into a poor person and have real serious intent prayer, mit asheret besofa, you'll have a wealthy year. Shneimar mereshit hashana, again, a verse we keep going back to, this idea of mereshit hashana va'ad acharit hashana, right? That God is always with us from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. But the pasuk doesn't say reshit. It's not written with an aleph. It's written mereshit without an aleph, which looks like rash. So they say, mereshit, if you make yourself a rash, then ad acharit, it will be a sofa sheyesh la'acharit. You'll have an end with a, it's exactly, not exactly how they define acharit here, but with an end to it, meaning not an end in a bad way. It'll keep going on. It will have an acharit, like a sequel almost. Okay, you'll have a good year. This is very, very, very famous line. This comes from also last week's parsha. This chapter before Akedat Yitzchak is what often people call the Akedah Yishmael, right? When Yishmael gets the Gerush, gets chased away. Very similar and parallel to the Akedah of Yitzchak. So interesting they bring it up here. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, ein danim et ha'adam ela lefi ma'asav shel otah sha'a. Right? The whole question is, why didn't God punish Yishmael there, right then and there on the spot? because of what he was going to eventually do to the Jewish people. So it's because he heard the cry of the child where he was at that point, right? Not where he was going to go, but where he was at that point, and therefore he was saved on account of that. Okay, just 1 second. Yeah. So now, right, this is a very famous line in general, right? It's in Jewish philosophy. If God knows, right? I remember learning this in high school, right? If God knows where we're going to go, why doesn't God judge us on that now, right? No, God judges us for what we've done, not for what we haven't yet done, even though he knows what we're going to do. You might remember this from brachot, you might not, but there's 3 times where your avonot get remembered. This means like when you put yourself in a dangerous situation, that's when you're more vulnerable, and therefore your avonot will come up. God will remember the bad things you did, and you might get punished. So beware of these things. The Elohim kir natoy, wall that's about to fall down. Right, you walk into a dangerous area where something could happen to you. You're kind of opening up. You're making yourself susceptible to getting hurt. Iyun tefillah. Okay, now iyun tefillah sounds like looking into tefillah. It sounds like a good thing. But what is iyun tefillah? Iyun tefillah is saying, I know God's going to answer me. Okay, Rashi says, Somech al tfilato shetei nishmat. I'm davening so hard that I know that God's going to listen to my prayers. That's a dangerous thing to say because, first of all, we don't really know, right? And you're making yourself look. It's like we say, b'li ayin hara, like you're kind of causing attention to yourself. Oh, look how much I'm putting my kavanah, my intent into my prayer, and that basically raises a whole big question. People are going to look at, oh, you're really being serious about your prayer, and maybe you're so confident, overly confident people, right? It's not always a good thing. Umosel din al chavero, someone who basically says, oh, God, you should judge that person for what they did. Okay, now we're going to see where the Amar Rabbi Avin, which actually should be changed to something else. I don't have time to look in the side, but maybe someone else said it. You'll be punished first if you try to get someone else in trouble. There's like, don't tattletale on someone, Shene'emar, how do we get it? Also from what we've been reading recently in the Torah, Vatomer Sarai al Avram, Chamasi alecha. And really it's what Sarai says to Avram down the road. She says, Yishpot Hashem, in the continuation there, Yishpot Hashem b'ni u'bencha. This is with the whole thing with Hagar. And she says, God will judge between the two of us who's right. That's basically asking God to judge Avraham. Now, how do we know that she gets punished for this? Uchtiv vayavo Avraham, upcoming parsha, lispo l'sara u'livkota. Who has to eulogize the other? She dies first. So that's her punishment, even though obviously that happened much later. But the point was, she said, God should judge you. And in the end, she gets judged. Okay, these are 4 things you can do to basically change the gzar din, right? This is a little different from our tefillah. Similar, we'll see, because 3 of the 4 are mentioned here in different words. In our tefillah, we say tzedakah, right? Tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, repentance, tzedakah, and prayer. Ma'avirin et ro'a hagzera, right? This can help overturn a decree of God. So here there's 4, and we're going to see even a 5th. The Elohim, tzedakah. Okay, that's tzedakah. We saw that. Tza'aka is prayer, crying out. Shinoi Hashem, this one doesn't appear there. Changing one's name. Vishinoi ma'aseh, and changing your actions. That's tshuva, basically. Tzedakah dichtiv u'tzedakah tatzil mimavet. Okay, tzedakah saves from death. Tza'aka dichtiv v'yitzaku al Hashem batzar lahem mimtzukotehem yotzihem. They cried out to God when it was hard for them, and God will save them from their distress. Shinoi Hashem dichtiv. Again, back to our parshiot. Sarai ishtecha lo tikrat shama Sarai ki Sarah shma. Changed her name from Sarai to Sarah, and then what happened? Uchtiv u'verachti ota v'gam natati mimena lecha ben. I will bless her, she'll be blessed, and she will have a child. Shinoi ma'aseh, right? This is why people add names when they're sick, exactly. Thank you for pointing that out. This is why when someone's sick, often they change a name, they add a name, okay? Also, it's supposed to add life. Shinoi ma'aseh dichtiv vayar Elohim et ma'asehem, v'uchtiv vayinachem Elohim al ha'ra'a asher diber la'asot lahem v'lo asai. I saw someone mentioned Ninveh, and before in the chat, I didn't notice in what context, but here also, right? God saw Ninveh's actions, that they changed their ways, and then God forgave them. The Yeshomrim, what's the 5th? Some people say, Af shinoi makom, even going to a new place. Like these are all things where changing a name, changing your actions. This is all right. You want to show I'm starting on a different path, right? It kind of gets you somewhere. So even changing places, right? You move to a different place. First of all, it always humbles you when you go to a new place because you're a nobody and you have to kind of make yourself again. And right after God tells Avram, go to Eretz Israel, and then he says, I'll make you a great nation. So there you see, change of place is a good thing. The Ida, right, caused Avram to get the bracha. Now, why wasn't that mentioned by everybody? And only it was a Yesh Omrim. It was the zchut of Israel that gave him zchuyot. It wasn't that he changed places. It was that he went to Israel, and that's why the bracha came upon him, because of Israel itself. Next, again, there's so much to say about all these things, but we don't have time. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, and wait till you get to the end of the daf. That's really the even more interesting. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, chayav adam la'agbil pnei rabo b'regel. Okay, now we get off on two more statements of Rabbi Yitzchak that don't have to do with Rosh Hashanah. All the rest of them did really. These have to do with the regel. First thing is you should visit your rabbi on the regel, on the holiday, Shenemar. Also from this week's Haftorah, this past week, Madua at holechet elav hayom lo chodesh velo Shabbat, when the Isha Shunamit, the baby from Elisha got, right, blessed her, had God bless her with the baby. Then the kid starts to, looks like he's dying. She runs to the Navi. She goes to Gehazi Nar, and he says, why are you here today? It's not Chodesh, it's not Shabbat. Right? From here, you learn that normally on Chodesh and Shabbat, they visited the rabbi. And what do you learn from here, right? Chodesh is not really such a holy day, obviously then, because it's not actually talking about a holiday here. There are Chodesh and Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh and Shabbat, but the assumption is if Rosh Chodesh, all the more so on the holiday. So from there, they say, right, Michlal, from here you can infer to Chodesh v'Shabbat, that you're supposed to go on Chodesh and Shabbat based on the fact that this is what she did. You have to also go to the mikveh and become pure. How do we know this? It says, don't touch the nevela, a dead body, a dead animal. Okay, we're going to have to understand this. To do that, we're going to bring a bright. How do we get from there that you have to go to the mikveh on the holiday? Tanya namihachi, there's a bright to support this. From the simple reading of that verse, it sounds like you can't touch nevelot, but can't possibly be. Talmud Lamal, Emor lakohanim b'nei Aaron. What does it say to the b'nei Aaron? Don't become tamei to a dead person. So they say like this: b'nei Aaron musarim, but b'nei Israel ein musarim. Right? We can go to funerals and become tamei, impure to dead people. Only kohanim can't. So from there you learn, right? Kavachalot varim kavachomer. Uma tuma chamura. Obviously, tuma mate of a dead person is much more severe, and yet. B'nei Aaron musarim, but Yisraelim einam musarim. But we're not commanded not to. So tum'ah kala lo kol sheken. So all the more so if it's just a dead animal, which is a much less severe form of tumah, of impurity. All the more so not. So therefore, elamatam ulamar b'nivlatam lo tigau baregel means don't touch a nevela on the holiday, meaning purify yourselves for the holiday. Okay, here comes our big lines about Rosh Hashanah and how we get judged and all that. Amar Rabbi Kuspidai, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This is very famous. We all learn this in, kindergarten or nursery. Shlosha sfarim niftachim beRosh Hashanah. Right? This wasn't like a thing of gananot that they decided, kindergarten teachers, let's make an easy way for kids to understand this. Let's give them this concept of books, and there's a book of life. No, this is something appears in the Bright or in the Gemara in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. There's 3 books opened on Rosh Hashanah. Echad shel Reshaim Gemurim. One is for real evil people. Echad shel Tzadikim Gemurim, pure Tzadikim. Echad shel Beinonim, and one for the average person. Tzadikim Gemurim, right, who don't fall there or there. Tzadikim Gemurim nichtavim v'nichtamim la'alter l'chayim. Immediately, Rosh Hashanah, they get written in the book of life. Reshaim Gemurim nichtavim v'nichtamim la'alter l'mitah. Reshaim go right to death. Beinonim tluim v'ondim mirosh Hashanah v'ad Yom Kippurim. Zachu nichtavim l'chaim, lo zachu nichtavim l'mitah. They're the ones who have those 10 days of repentance to basically figure it out, get their act together, and hopefully get sealed for life. Big question asked by all the commentaries on this. If this is true, right? Why do I make a joke about Gan and nursery? Because in Gan and nursery, you could teach things in such a clear-cut, simple way, right? Black and white and evil and good. But as you grow up that it's not so simple. And Tzadikim don't always get life, and Rishaim don't always get death, and this doesn't always fit the model. So 4 models of how to understand this. Okay. I know this is long and we're getting late, but it's just too interesting to not talk about. So one is Tosfot, who basically says this is Olam Haba, the world to come. This doesn't have to do with this world, so don't ask any questions from this world. That's one approach. All the other approaches say we are talking about this world, but Rasha and Sadiq doesn't mean evil person, good person. It means if you're going to be judged, and it's clear you're going to be judged for good, for whatever reason, maybe you're a Rasha, but you did something good, and because of that, you're going to get judged immediately. And if your judgment is so clearly it's going to be good, but not necessarily, we don't know why, then you'll be judged immediately. If it's so clearly bad, you're going to be judged immediately, but not Rasha and Sadiq. Third option, the Ravid. He says, your life is determined from the beginning, how many years you're going to live. But what's this saying? If you're Tzaddik Gamul, then you'll get maybe a few extra years, and that you'll get immediately. God will say, okay, I'll add a few extra years to what you were supposed to get. So you might see a Tzaddik who dies young, but maybe from the beginning, he was supposed to have not a lot of years. Again, why this is, that's a whole separate question. We don't really understand. Sefer Achinuch says, when it says Risha'im Gemulim and Tzaddikim Gemulim, it doesn't mean like a really good person who has a few sins. No, it means a really good person who has no sins, or a really evil person who has no good deeds. Now, how many people are there like that in the world? Probably almost nobody. And therefore, almost everybody that you know who you think is a tzaddik or you think is a rasha is really in the Benoni category, and therefore it's less clear. So those are 4 different possible approaches. Okay, let's finish the page. Amar Rabbi Avin, Maika, where do we get this idea that there's 3 books? We're going to have 2 different psukim. Rabbi Avin brings one. Yimachu misefer chayim ve'im tzadikim al yikatevu. You'll be wiped out from the Sefer Chayim, and with tzadikim you will not be written. Yimachu misefer mentions one book. That's for the evil people. Chayim, zesifran shel tzadikim. Ve'im tzadikim al yikatevu zesifran shel beinonim. They say there's mention of a few different things in this verse. Each one references a different book, even though it's not the simple reading. This is Moshe Rabbeinu. He says, right, if not, he says, right, don't wipe out the people. And if you do want to do that, then, wipe me out from your book. So again, all this reference to a book, Asher Katavta, and this and that. Mechenina, wipe me out. Zesifran shel Rishaim. Mi sifrecha, zesifran shel tzadikim, Asher Katavta, zesifran shel Beinonim. So again, there's references to as if there's a bunch of books there. Again, it's not the simple reading, but that's how he reads it. Last part for today. Tanya Beit Shammai Omrim Shalosh Kitotin Liyom Hadin. Now we're talking about the future when there's resurrection of the dead. There's going to be 3 different categories of people. Echad shel tzadikim gemulim, ve'echad shel rishaim gemulim, ve'echad shel beinonim. Same breakdown. Tzadikim gemulim nichtavim la'alter l'chayei olam. They're going to get resurrected forever back to the, they'll be in this world forever. Rishaim gemulim nichtavim la'alter l'gehenom. They'll go straight to hell. Shneimar. How do we know that some will go to hell and some will get back to life? Right? Many of the people from the people who are sleeping, dead basically, will wake up again. These will get life, and those will get down into the depths. The Beinonim we'll get to tomorrow. What happens to them? Leave you in suspense. Have a great day, everybody. I hope you enjoyed all these concepts of Rosh Hashanah, of the importance of Yom Hadin, and where this all came from. Remember that Yom Hadin doesn't appear in the Torah at all. This is a rabbinic and a later, probably preceded the time of the Tanaim, but we don't know exactly when it developed, but that it got this nature of being Yom Hadin, and that's one of the main things that was discussed in today's stuff. Have a great day.